Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our latest Zillow Speaker Series, and I am so excited to welcome Rob McKenna to Zillow. This is going to be really exciting and really great to hear from him. Let me give a quick intro, and then he's gonna talk for a few minutes, and we'll ask lots of questions. So Rob McKenna is our state attorney general and is running for governor on the Republican ticket. He has a long history in politics in the Pacific Northwest, having gone to school in Bellevue and attended the University of Washington. After law school at the University of Chicago, he moved back with his family and has been raising his 4 kids in Bellevue. Rob began his public service career in 1995, running and winning a seat on the King County Council, and he was reelected twice. In 2004, he won his first race for Attorney General and was reelected in 2008. So he's currently Attorney General and, like I said, is running for governor. So we're so excited to welcome him here. Let's give him a welcome from Zillow and applause.
Thank you.
And he's going to give us a few words, and we're going to jump right into questions.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm really flattered by the big turnout. It's just a terrific opportunity. This state is a little bit too large to doorbell, so being able to talk to groups like this or the group at REI I had a chance to address last month is just really, really terrific, so thank you. Second point I want to make right at the outset is to express my sincere condolences for the death of Justin Ferrari. It was terribly shocking for everyone, of course, and for my family as well, because my daughter lives a few blocks from where he died, where he was killed. She's a Seattle University student and rents a house not far at all from where that occurred. And you know, it really makes you pause and think about randomness in life, but also it makes me, as a law enforcement official, think about how much we need to get on top of the growing gang problem in our state. It's a problem I've been talking about since 2006 when I conducted a survey of state law enforcement officers and documented the rapid growth in gang activity in our state in urban areas and in rural areas, unlike anything we'd seen since the late 1980s. And frankly, we were way past where we were back then. Most of the shootings that we've seen lately, with the exception of the one yesterday, which I'll talk about in a moment, clearly had some sort of gang nexus. And I have to tell you, we are losing the battle on 2 fronts. We're losing the battle for the hearts and minds of children who are being recruited by gangs at a younger and younger age, and we're losing the battle with the gang leaders who are doing the recruiting. When I went to Madrona K-8 school to visit a few years ago, it's a very, very special school in the central area. The principal walked me out back and pointed to the fence around the back of the playground. She said, "You see that fence?" She said, "That's where the gangbangers stand and try to recruit my 5th and 6th graders." She's got kids that are 2nd, even 3rd generation gang related. We are not winning the battle. The only way to get there is to give kids a lot more alternatives and programs so that they see something better for themselves than being involved in a gang. It means we have to fund the school buildings to keep them open until mom and dad get home so the kids can stay for after-school tutoring and sports and other activities. We need to invite the nonprofit groups like the Boys and Girls Clubs to come into every school and be there to work with the kids. We need to pay our teachers extra to stay after and tutor. But we've got to get on top of this, and not just in Seattle either. This is a huge problem in little bitty communities as well, where they just don't have the resources right now, and where mom and or dad are out working and there's no one home when the school bell rings and the kids go home to an empty house. On the other side of it, you've got hardcore gangbangers. The leaders are called shot callers, who are very, very skilled at recruiting kids, and we are frankly letting them get away with it. I've offered legislation both to increase services for kids and to come down harder on the leaders, and we've had very great difficulty in getting those measures through the state legislature. In terms of what happened yesterday, you have an individual who we don't know enough about yet, but seems pretty evident went off the deep end. And it underscores how critically important it is that we strengthen our laws to keep guns away from the mentally ill or people who have been seen. I'm gonna guess that when we know more about this guy, it'll turn out that he'd had interactions with law enforcement and with mental health before. But until a couple of us ran a bill in the legislature about 3 years ago, we didn't even have a state law to keep guns away from people who are mentally ill that matched the federal law. People who've been involuntarily committed could legally possess guns under state law, even though it was a violation of federal law. We got that changed, but it underscores how inadequately we handle the mentally ill in our state today. And we need to rethink how we're helping people who are mentally ill, and we need to rethink how we can keep guns away from people like them, and of course the gangbangers as well. So again, my condolences to Mr. Ferrari and his family. It's just unthinkable, and also to all the victims who were killed yesterday. One of whom is the wife of a friend of mine in Rotary, and you just don't know what to say when something happens to a loved one of someone you know. This campaign, this election, broadly, is about three issues. It's about the economy and job creation. It's about education, reforming it and adequately funding it. And it's about making our state government work better so that we can promote job creation and have the resources to invest in education. So I'm going to give you a very high-level overview of my thinking on these three areas. I'll encourage you to visit our website, robmckenna.org, to look at detailed policy papers that we publish there that go into a lot more specifics. But I want to give you a flavor for my approach to these issues. On job creation, we have to confront this as the #1 issue in our state and our country today. This morning, the latest unemployment figures came out, and they did this usual thing where they reported jobless claims and how many new jobs were created, and then they said the unemployment rate is now 8.1 or 8.2%. That's not the real unemployment rate, because it doesn't count people who are not currently collecting benefits. If you count people who aren't currently collecting benefits as well as those who are, people who are seriously underemployed or simply don't have a job, that rate is over 17% in our state. It's not as high as that in Seattle, but around the state there are many parts of our state that have an excess of 20% unemployment when you count everybody who's unemployed. So what do we do about it? #1, we have to make Washington State more affordable in which to create jobs. This is one of the most expensive states in the country in which to employ people. We have a very heavy regulatory burden. We have a very difficult business occupation tax for small companies especially. We have the most expensive unemployment insurance in the country and some of the most expensive workers' compensation costs in America as well. The state can address those things. To give you one example, we're one of only 4 states where the state monopolizes industrial insurance or workers' comp. And 2 of the other states are very small rural states. There's just 2 bigger states that do that, us and Ohio. We ought to open it up to competition the way that 46 other states have already done. It's been proven to lower costs. When you lower costs, more jobs are created. It's one of several things that we can do to make it more affordable to create jobs in this state. Second big issue in this race and in this election is education. And in the long run, this is the most important issue that we're facing. Because the fact of the matter is, our public schools are not getting it done for us, and we're underfunding, in fact, disinvesting in our higher education system. I mean, consider the fact that we rank in the bottom third of states for on-time graduation from high school. Consider that we're one of the only states in America that has a large achievement gap, which is the gap in test scores between low-income kids and the rest of the kids, that's actually getting bigger. Other states are shrinking, are working to eliminate their achievement gap, and ours is growing. And this disproportionately affects children of color, where you have high percentages of African American students, Latino students, Native American students, and some Asian Pacific Islander students who are way below where they should be in their test scores. They're way below standard. And it doesn't have to be this way. We can follow the example of the 12 states that successfully competed in President Obama's Race to the Top competition for education reform, and we can make changes that will raise these kids up. For example, the states that were successful, there were 12 of them, while we came in almost dead last. We were 32nd out of 36 in round 2. The states that were successful are doing 3 things that are working. #1, they have strategies to get their best teachers into their most challenging schools. That makes sense, doesn't it? You want your greatest teachers to work in the schools that have the biggest challenges. So, for example, we should pay our great teachers more because they're great. In other words, we should pay for performance, not just based on seniority. And then we should pay them more if they're willing to work in the toughest schools. And we should budget per child and based on the children's needs, not based on the adults. In Seattle and every other urban school district in our state, we consistently spend the most amount of money per child in the wealthiest schools, and we spend the least amount of money per child in the poorest schools. And that's because the money follows the adults, not the kids. And so, for example, south of downtown, the schools typically have 2 to 3 times more inexperienced teachers than in schools north. That's because, on average, a teacher will work in a very challenging school as a new teacher, get some experience and some seniority, and take that seniority north, where they'll bid on jobs that are in the schools that have more resources. So we have to change that around. That's what other states have been doing. That's why states like Florida and Tennessee have been making really rapid progress. Secondly, these states all have high standards for high school graduates. In our state, 56% of the high school graduates, the ones who actually do graduate, who go to community college, have to enroll in remedial math or remedial English or both. At South Seattle Community College, like at every other community college, they have people take an assessment test as they come in. And they report that among Seattle public high school graduates who take that test, only 4% pass the math test. It means they've graduated from high school, but they can't do first-year community college math. So what do we do about these things? Number one, we rank between 34th and 46th in the country in per pupil expenditures. So I don't think we're investing enough. Where do we invest the money to get the biggest impact? We invested in a compensation system that pays for performance. We invested in a system that gives every teacher a great school principal who is an instructional leader, not just an administrator. We invested in Head Start. You know, there are 19,500 very poor children. I don't just mean low income. These are the poorest of the poor who cannot get into Head Start in our state today. There aren't enough slots. We spend it on all-day kindergarten. In Seattle, it costs about $2,600 a year to pay for the second half of the kindergarten day under the new rates established by the school board. And of course, the very children whose parents cannot afford that are the ones who most need to be in all-day K. We fund the districts to keep their buildings open to invite nonprofit groups in with tutors, mentors, and coaches. Pay the teachers extra to stay after and tutor. We invest in a longer school year for kids who are behind. It doesn't make any sense to take children who are behind at the end of the school year and send them home for the summer. Keep them in school. Help them catch up. Help them get ahead. For the older kids, we need to invest in 2 areas. Number 1, career skills, and number 2, science, technology, engineering, and math. College prep. There are some people who say not every kid needs to go to college. That is false. Every kid, at a minimum, needs to go to technical college or community college to earn, if not a degree, at least a certificate, so they can work in one of the skilled areas. You can't just go to work in a modern manufacturing facility today with a high school diploma. You can work in food service, but not in a typical factory where you can earn a living wage. So we need to open the schools up to bring more people in who have those experiences. But we make it really hard right now for someone who's retiring as a computer software programmer or someone retiring as an engineer from Boeing to go to work in the schools. It's expensive, takes a long time, and most people are discouraged from doing it because they can't afford it. Because you don't get paid as a student intern working in a school after you get your certificate. You don't get paid while you're earning your certificate. You're paying out for tuition. Let's make it easier for people from the skilled trades, whether they're engineers or machinists or welders, who want to teach to get the certificate they need to come in and be around the kids. Because most kids in school today have no exposure to any adult in that school who has any of those experiences. For the older kids, the key is expanding AP, making more international baccalaureate programs available, and really providing rigor in the high school curriculum for kids who are aiming for university. There are programs that work very well in this area for low-income children, like a program in Vancouver, Washington, that puts nearly 300 computer scientists, software engineers, physicists, and other scientists into the high schools to work with AP math and science teachers and their students. And they have dramatically expanded the number of courses, AP courses in math and science, that the kids in 4 high schools, which are low income, are taking. It's working. We have to invest in higher education. That means stop cutting the funding for UW and WSU and dramatically raising the cost of tuition. It means expanding programs that are in high demand, like engineering, computer science, and other fields where employers like Zillow cannot find enough people being produced locally. And so companies are going out of state and out of country more and more to bring people in because we're not producing enough people. So how do you pay for all of this? Both K-12 and higher ed. The first thing to recognize is that education in the state budget has been shrinking as a percentage of the state budget for the last 2 decades. In the mid-'80s to early '90s, 2/3 of the state budget was devoted to education, from preschool to graduate school. Today, it's about half. That's an enormous delta in a $32 billion budget. So we have to set the goal, we have to make the decision that we're going to grow the share of the budget that's used for education. That means we're going to squeeze the rest of state government to reduce cost and increase efficiencies, and we're going to do it the way I've done it in my office. We have 15% fewer employees than we did 4 years ago. We're saving our clients $30 million a biennium in reduced legal services cost. We've done that by engaging and empowering every employee in the office in a process of continuous quality improvement that applies lean manufacturing principles and other modern management principles to cut costs, eliminate non-value-added activity, and improve effectiveness. Despite being smaller and having smaller in people and smaller in budget, we have the highest employee morale of any large agency in state government, and we have consistently rising client satisfaction scores. It's because my style of leadership and management is that of a servant leader. My job is to figure out what everyone in the office needs to do their job. And every single person in my office knows that they are critical to our ability to constantly improve the organization. And, by the way, we pay for performance, not just for seniority. If you do better work, you do better in the office. Second thing we can do is devote growth in the state budget to education. The fact of the matter is that we will see growth in the state budget over the next several biennia of what is projected to be about 9.2% a year. That means in 16 years at that rate, the state budget will double. We have to decide that most of that growth is going to be devoted to education. Not 100% of it, not 80% of it, but around 2/3 of it needs to go to education so we can reverse the downward trend that we've been seeing over the last several years where they've been getting a smaller and smaller share of the pie, especially of the new money. We can also save money by using more competitive contracting in state government. It's already written into the law. The governor chooses not to use it. We should put up more of what the state does for IT, building maintenance, printing services, and other back office functions for competitive bidding so that we get the best deal for the taxpayers. Doesn't mean we automatically privatize everything, but we do need to know where we can get the best deal, so you let the state employees compete with the private sector, nonprofit and for-profit, to get the best deal possible for taxpayers. All of these things together, with a lot of discipline and focus on the goal, will allow us to grow funding for education to achieve the goals that I've just outlined. And that's my main message to you. We've got to reform state government, make it work better, empower state employees to do their best work, and aim state government in the direction my office has been headed in since I arrived as AG, which is to be the best public law office in America. I believe every agency in state government is capable of being the best at what they do in the country. And that's exactly where they should be focusing, what they should be aiming for. And I believe the people of the state deserve and can have the best state government in the United States that allows us to free up resources to invest in a reformed and innovative public school system, in the most accessible, high-quality higher education system possible, and in a culture which supports job creation and entrepreneurship and innovation in our state. We call this the new direction for Washington State. It's jobs, education, state government reform. I'm delighted to have a chance to share it with you, and I look forward to answering your questions about those or other issues as well. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Rob. So I sent an email out last week and asked Zillow employees what issues they'd most like to hear from you on. I got two questions really rose to the top. One was about education, which I think you just covered your stance on education quite thoroughly. The other one that I got from several people was the issue, is the issue of gay marriage, and in particular, everything that's happening in the state of Washington right now, and that it was recently legalized, but now there's talk of a referendum with enough signatures for a referendum, so people would actually have to vote on it at the polls this fall. Can you talk to us about your stance on this, and if there is a referendum, where you stand on either side of that?
Well, I support the current law, which was also approved by the voters in Referendum 71, which allows domestic partnerships and legal rights for same-sex partners and actually some different-sex partners as well who are older. I think it's a good law, and I'm proud that it was passed by the voters in the state by a pretty wide margin. I don't support changing the definition of marriage because for me, marriage is a religious institution first and foremost. But I also recognize that others have different views, and I think this is the kind of issue that is well suited for the ballot. And if the voters approve Referendum 74, which I think is probably going to be on the ballot, as governor, I will enforce it and I will veto any attempts to undo it. Because once the voters have spoken, they've spoken. It's done, and we move forward from there. Because there are legitimate points of view on both sides of the question. So I do think it's well suited, and although President Obama has evolved, as he put it, on this issue, he and I still agree on one key point, which is this is appropriate for the states to decide. And our state is going to decide it this fall.
Another question that was asked a few times is around mass transportation and issues, particularly in this part of Western Washington, people trying to get into the city.
Right.
All of the public transportation. Talk to us a little bit about that and how that can be improved.
Well, the key is, I think, is to make sure that when you invest in transit, you're investing in places where the market demand exists and you're actually growing the number of new transit riders instead of just moving people from one form of transit to another. It's all about market share. If you don't move people out of their cars, you're not really making much progress. There's high demand for transit service in downtown Seattle, and the city could not function without it. Unfortunately, we see people standing on the sidewalk watching buses roll by that are already full because there isn't enough bus service. I find that very frustrating because I know we could grow transit market share significantly if we put more of our transit budget into rubber-tired transit. And we're not doing that right now. We're investing billions and billions of dollars in one transit line that is going to mostly carry people who used to use the bus. It was decided by the voters, however, so it's moving forward, and it's a regional decision that the state is not directly involved with, so I wish them every bit of luck in successfully completing that project. But it leaves us with the problem of not having enough transit that reaches everybody, which is our rubber-tired transit system. I want to see our bus rapid transit systems expanded. So if King County comes back to the legislature and asks for more taxing authority to expand their bus system, I'll support it, because I think this is where we can most radically expand the number of people using transit service. We also need to continue investing in bike lanes and in bike corridors for people to use. It's a good alternative for people, as is creating walkable communities so that people don't feel like they have to hop in a vehicle of any kind just to get from point A to point B. So growth management is really important. Increasing the density of existing urban areas, creating walkable communities in those urban areas, preventing sprawl, that's also part of the strategy. It not only reduces the need to drive, but also creates healthier communities because people are getting out and walking more.
One thing we're finding as a company in Seattle is that the competition for talent is even more heated as companies from the Bay Area come up and establish headquarters here, like Facebook and Zynga and Groupon. You touched a bit in your talking about education on another issue we're having, which is related to that, which is getting enough engineering and development talent. Mm-hmm. On the mode of that, and also somewhat related to transportation, what are some things that as governor you could do to help companies like ours attract more talent, to make it a more attractive environment for people to start new companies in Western Washington, right, and to do it here versus the Bay Area or New York or other hubs that are competing for tech talent?
Well, let's focus on education again for a minute. We need to produce more high school graduates who are interested in the quantitative fields, which means we need to expand STEM offerings in all our high schools, and it'd be good to have more STEM schools as well, like Aviation High School, currently in Burien, soon to be located by the Museum of Flight. So there are strategies in the K-12 area that could be effective in expanding the pool of students interested in the quantitative fields when they go to college. Then let's think about how we make more of those programs available in higher education. We can't afford to put all of the new slots in CS or engineering at main campus UW or WSU. It's just too expensive. The key is adding some slots at main campus, but also expanding the offerings at the branch campuses. The branch campuses have several advantages. And by the way, I'm talking about UW-Tacoma, UW-Bothell, WSU Everett, WSU Tri-Cities, and so forth. One of the advantages they have is they produce bachelor's degrees at a considerably lower cost than the main campuses do. They have lower overhead, lower fixed costs. It's just more cost effective. A second critical advantage they have is that they are closer to where the students are. And there are a lot of students who are place-bound. Maybe they want to enroll in engineering or computer science or math, but they can't get, and let's say they get into the UW or WSU, they can't get to Pullman. They can't get to Bellingham. They can't get to Seattle. So we need to bring the programs closer to them at the branch campuses, and we need to expand what are called the university centers at several of our community colleges, where universities come and make courses available at the community college. because again, that brings the programming closer to the students where they live, where they work, where their families are, and they can earn those degrees, and the degrees can be provided at a considerably lower cost. This is a system that California has used very effectively. We're doing it, we're just not doing it enough, and partly because we've slashed the percentage of the budget that goes to higher ed by half over the last couple of decades. It's fallen to 8% of the state budget from 16.
Let's open it up for audience questions.
We need to pay more attention to who's running for school board, who's serving on the school board, because that is really key. And some of the most successful districts in our state got there by changing school boards and putting good people in who hired a great superintendent and great principals, and off to the races they go. But the fact is, they have to operate within the confines of state law. So you're right, they can negotiate away certain things, but there's certain things they can't negotiate away, such as the new requirement that teacher evaluations be linked to multiple measures of student progress. Because right now, how a teacher is evaluated is completely disconnected, has no relationship to whether the students are progressing or not, believe it or not. They don't actually factor that in. The new law will require it and require the school districts to use it, because the state legislature has passed it into law. What's going to be happening in the next several years is that we're going to shift from over-reliance on local school levies to a dominant reliance on state funding for K-12. It's going to be, I think, at least 90% state funding because of the constitutional imperative that the Supreme Court has pointed out. And as a result of that, the legislature is going to have, and the governor will have even more say over some of the specifics. Now, this creates tension because of the interest in local control, but you have to balance local control against the need for high standards and results. And you can't allow 295 separate school districts to deliver substandard results, which is what's been happening. Well, I'm all in favor of devoting of more revenues and devoting more of the growth in revenues to education. And the surest way to do that is by growing the economy and by making sure that as revenue comes in, we actually focus it where we most need it. The voters have made it very clear that they're hurting, and they're not interested in tax rates being raised, and they're not interested in brand new taxes. So, for example, in 2010, 65% of the voters voted against creating a state income tax. They put in a 2/3 supermajority requirement for the legislature, which, as you know, is currently in court, to make it harder to raise taxes. And just to make sure Olympia was listening, a large majority voted to repeal a temporary tax on soda pop and bottled water, which I voted for because I don't like soda pop. This is a good one. I'm going to vote for this tax. But the majority of voters wiped it out, right? So what were they telling us there? What were they telling us when they repealed the motor vehicle excise tax, which we needed for transit and for transportation? What were they telling us when they put a tighter lid on property tax growth? They're saying, look, we have budgets too. Our families are hurting. Income levels have been flat for the average family, or negative for the average family in Washington state. And so there's clearly a tolerance level among the public, and we have to acknowledge that. And one of the things that irritates me about hearing people in Olympia say, well, we just need more money and more higher taxes, is they're not getting them, and they're not going to get. They're just kicking the can down the road. Are they going to decide that we're going to take the revenue growth we do have and the budget and the existing budget we do have, we're going to prioritize it for education, or not? Or are they just going to blame the voters for the fact that they claim they don't have enough money to prioritize education? This is what they've been doing. They're saying, oh, we'd love to do these things, but I'm sorry, we don't have the budget. You either prioritize it or you don't. And I know we can because we used to do it. And we lost track of it over the last couple of decades. And it's fairly devastating results as a consequence. So, you're going to see fee increases. And I'm going to bring a package out for the voters to consider for transportation investments, because all of our big transportation investments are voter approved. So I'm not adverse to it. I don't take pledges, like the no new tax pledge. But I also think you need to be realistic about where the tolerance of the voters is, particularly in a really tough economy. And you can't wait for someday in order to get started on improving our education system and on adequately funding it. If you look at the UW, it's very interesting. You've got 25% of the students who pay no tuition at all because of federal support, state support, and private scholarships. You've got some number, I don't know what, let's just say it's 25%, whose parents just write the check. And you got the middle who just get squeezed because we've seen tuition go up so dramatically in the last several years. So my vision is for what I call the 50-50 deal. It means that we increase the amount of state support for higher education, again, in other words, bring it back up towards where it used to be, so that the state pays for half of the cost and tuition covers the other half. Right now, the state covers about 25% and tuition covers 75%. Absolutely upside down from where it was when I was in college in the 1980s. We have to go back at least to the 50-50 deal. So I think you're right that dramatically increasing tuition or other costs for specialty fields cuts against that. And I would rather avoid that, expand the number of slots. It may mean we have fewer slots in other areas. We may not have as many speech communications positions, majors available. But we need to go where the... Sorry about that. Yeah. Well, I had a feeling. But I wanted you to brace yourself that the people coming up behind you might find it a little harder to get into some of those fields that are, not in as high a demand as engineering, CS, and the other positions. We have to make decisions. We have to allocate resources. But again, it's not all about the main campuses either. It's about the branch campuses. It's even about the community colleges. And for the skilled trades, like aerospace assembly, it's about creating new models that allow people to earn the training, get the training and earn the certificates they need to go to work in those fields. And there's some very good models that exist already today that are completely self-sustaining financially that we need to expand. So we have to have a variety of, almost a portfolio approach to meeting these needs. But I'm very concerned about pricing people out of education, particularly in fields that are in the highest demand, for the reason you just suggested. Yeah. I think that it would be a big mistake to go that direction. I think the most you're going to see, you might see some additional fees related to program costs, but I want to expand the number of people in those programs, not price them out. It just, and I understand what the university is going to say. They're going to say, if you want us to expand, we need more funding. I agree. That's why we need to reverse this downward trend in what... In fact, did you know this year we're spending less money on our four-year colleges than we did 20 years ago? I mean, it's hard to believe, but less of the state budget's going to our four-year universities than it did in 1991. That's... No, in actual dollars. We spent $1.1 or $1.2 billion in the 91-93 biennium, and this biennium we're spending just over $1 billion. It's astounding, isn't it? And $1 billion doesn't buy as much as it used to. I mean, so an actual nominal, it's astounding, but it's true. And they've made up for some of it with much, much higher tuition, but of course that's having all the consequences we've been discussing here. Well, what was going on there is they were literally taking away collective bargaining. We're not going to do that. They were also taking state employees and school district employees from 0 contribution to their health insurance to 12%. We've been at 12% for a long time. We've actually gone up to 15%. I'll try to be very brief, but I'll give you 5 places we're going to find money to invest in education. The first one is we are going to squeeze general government for greater efficiencies, for leaner production. I know it's possible. What we're going to do is reduce the number of people in the workforce through attrition. Just as people retire, we're not going to replace all of them. And the people who remain will be more productive because of the performance systems we're using. Number 2, we're going to devote a lot of the growth in the state revenue, which I described to you. And it does grow. Even in a down economy like this one, state revenues are up $1.5 billion. Number 3, we're going to look at tax expenditures and make sure that of the 500 or 600 tax loopholes and preferences, we can afford and need all of them. Number 4, we're going to repurpose some existing education spending to use it more effectively. One example of this is that we spend $330 million per year on a bump in pay for teachers who've earned master's degrees because they have a master's. The problem is there's 0 connection between having a master's degree and being a better teacher and getting better results, as the Gates Foundation and others have demonstrated. I want to repurpose that compensation money into other forms of compensation like pay for performance. And number 5, we're going to, as we shift from over-reliance on local property tax levies to the state common school levy, which is a property tax, we're going to see greater stability and more money for our poorest school districts because they're very property poor. They have very high levy rates, and they'll do better when they get that money from the state instead of from local sources. So those 5 areas are where we're going to go, and I think collectively they will produce the money that we need. It's the same strategy we use to close the loophole for mortgage interest. There's a B&O tax preference that allowed the big banks not to pay B&O tax on interest they earned on first mortgages. and a big bipartisan group appealed it because they did a study in the legislature that analyzed it, figured out it wasn't lowering the cost of home borrowing, it wasn't achieving any of the benefits it was supposed to achieve, and they said, well, we don't need it. On the other hand, unfortunately, the legislature adopted new tax loopholes for other industries that actually take more money out than the amount being recovered from that first one. So we have to be really disciplined about not allowing new ones that we can't afford either. So we're going to subject the tax expenditures to the same kind of zero-based budget analysis that we subject the spending to. And we need to subject all the regulations to that as well. Everything has a cost, so everything should be subjected to a really careful scrutiny to look for ways to lower the cost, increase production, and still achieve the fundamental values that we're seeking. In other words, there's no one thing. There's a common misperception. People say, you can't do this because there aren't enough tax loopholes. Well, you're right, there aren't. So that's one thing. And there are at least four other areas. You have to do it all. That's how we got into this pickle we're in to begin with. It was all of this stuff. And therefore, the only way to get back from it is to reverse all 5 of those areas and go in the right direction. It goes into the general fund. And so it'll be available for education. We have to be disciplined and say, look, this is going to be our top priority. A lot of people, or not a lot, there's some who attack my approach that say, well, you know, where are you going to get enough money? But they don't even agree with the premise that it should be education should be our number one priority. I mean, if you don't agree with the premise, then people like that are just being disingenuous because they don't even have the goal of getting there. If you don't have the goal, you never get there. Liquor taxes go into the general fund. You know, as the economy grows, the population grows, that revenue will grow. I'm not here to tell you that liquor is going to be cheaper as a result of the initiative the voters approved, but it should be more convenient. It should be better for restaurants and you know, those who buy it from suppliers. More of the money that the state collects will net to the Treasury because we're not incurring the cost of operating the liquor stores. So in other words, our net will be better overall as a result of privatization, which means more money available for education and other priorities. But I don't think you're going to see a big drop in the price of liquor as a result of privatization because of the way the law was constructed. Although Costco sincerely hopes you believe it's cheaper and that you come and buy pallets of it, I guess. I mean, that's their objective. And as you may have seen on the news today, it was the challenge to the initiative's constitutionality was rejected by the Supreme Court. We were able to successfully defend it, so it will remain the law. So raise a toast to that if you like the law.
Rob, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. Thanks.